Hi everyone. I always forget that this is like already recording when I start the video. So that's annoying and weird, but that's okay. I will make sure that that isn't an issue in subsequent videos. And excuse me for that yawn. Been up since 6 a.m. because I am in a class that starts that early and blah, blah, blah. The point is, hi, I'm going to be talking about Mercury retrograde. I know it started a few days ago. It started on the 30th. And it's the 3rd, and usually I would have done it by now, but I didn't because I had some not other things that I had to do, rather I just was not in the space to do it. Not that anything particular was going on, but I think that the universe was just like, no, time to like pause, And so that's what I did. I paused because when the universe says pause, you do it. And I like to be a good listener in that regard. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my nose and I'm like, my nose looks weird. It's like, no, it doesn't. Like, I'm just being obsessive. Anyway, so I'm gonna pull up the chart for Mercury retrograde. What I do want to say before we even get into this reading is that this is a clarification of a lot of blockages, and it's happening because like we had to take the actions necessary to start those blockages from clearing. By not continuing to feed those circuits, we have allowed energy to be unclogged or like unblocked essentially. So I don't know. I was listening to my sister had like a seminar that she was giving, and that's why I'm not fully prepared. Sorry. um, but let's go to the chart for Mercury. It's 1551 that's 3:51 Greenwich Mean Time, and I'm just gonna ground my energy and get in this space, and feel free to do so alongside me. And so, yeah, some of my crystals because I feel like I'm gonna need them. So basically, what I'm getting from this energy is that this actually has a lot to do with the full moon in Gemini that we had in Sagittarius season. And it's so hard to believe that it's already been like 2 seasons since then. Like it's felt like those 2 seasons just really dragged forward. Or if you want to think about it, like the past 2 months seemed to really drag forward uncomfortably. And it's really astounding to me that like we got through it because it's been so challenging. It's been frankly a lot. I know for myself and for so many others, it's been a lot. So I just want to say kudos to everybody who's gone through it. With Mercury having gone retrograde, especially because it was a full moon in Gemini, like, there's a lot of inner clarification happening. There's a lot of inner workings being healed and like salvaged. that's happening here with this energy. So I just want to really speak to that. Internally, as I said, there's a lot of blockages being cleared, and the heart is, there's a lot of heart ascendancy going on. So we are rising out of the ashes of that old life that we burned down, essentially, because we did. I know for me, like back this time last year, like February of last year, we were starting this like cycle back like around Lupercalia, especially. It was like the third week of February, I had an event at the Ace Hotel, which was a Lupercalia themed event. And this is something that's on the Patreon. Before I deleted Twitter, it was on the Twitter, but thankfully I put it on the Patreon before even all of that. But so the Ides of March and the Lupercalia, like everything was kind of leading up to this massive collective tower moment that we experienced. And I keep blinking because my contact lens is messed up. I hate contacts. Like you have no idea, but it's especially hard when I have makeup on. Okay, so we're back. Yeah, that has to do, like I said, with there's a lot of heart healing that's going on, a lot of cleansing and purification. That's really important. I feel like doing smoke purifications is going to be really helpful in this time. So if you are anybody who is not Indigenous American, you like Indigenous Americans can use white sage, the rest of us cannot. And I am not kidding about this. Like honestly, if you are non-Indigenous American and you're using white sage, like, and you know better, I don't even like unfollow me, honestly. Like if you can't get that through your head and you can't respect other people's cultures and like generational trauma, like don't, I'm not interested in having you as a part of my community. And that's very, very real. And I'm not going to repeat myself about this many more times, I don't think. Like I'm not making compromises about it. Figure it out. That being said, if you are not Indigenous American, you can use blue sage, you can use mugwort, which I think is also like brown sage. You can use cinnamon, which is extremely powerful. And I especially, like, yeah, you can use cinnamon, which especially because 𝖵𝖈𝖃 has just been going on. I think today's the last day of 𝖵𝖈𝖃. You can use cinnamon because cinnamon is related to fire and so therefore related to Brigid or Brigid, and this like fire femme, divine fire femme. And it also speaks to what I was saying about burning our lives down, this spirit of transformation, this energy of transformation that we were interacting with all throughout 2020. It's very tower energy, very death energy, very karmic, powerful energy because it's all related to Saturn. And Mercury retrograde here is us communicating. Like, are you really about that life that you said that you're about? Are you really like gonna do what you said that you were gonna do? Because if you're not actually gonna do it, then why did you say that you were gonna do it? You know what I mean? And that's what we're interacting with here. It's about, you know, with retrogrades, it always has to do with the prefix re. And I know that maybe sounds very simple, but it's not. And it's a preposition in the matter of used typically as the first word. Well, that's not what I mean. Oh, let's see. I'm looking for it as They're talking about regard. I'm Googling prefix. The prefix re means back or again. It appears in hundreds of English vocabulary words, for example, reject, regenerate, and revert. You can remember that the prefix re means back via the word return or to turn back. To remember that re means again, consider rearrange or arrange again. So I think that is like the perfect way to think about retrogrades. We're going back and doing everything kind of over again to get a closer look. Mercury, let's pull up this. Define mercurial of a person subject to change or in unpredictable changes of mood or mind, or containing, or yeah. So that can be like volatile, capricious, temperamental, excitable. In terms of what we're talking about though, Mercury, the planet, is very, in this like, it's also containing the element Mercury. Mercury, the planet, is also, it is the planet of communication. It is largely about systems, because you cannot communicate if you don't have a system to communicate through. You know what I mean? And if those lines, if those channels of communication are not, they don't exist. That's a problem. That's something that's going to be considered during Mercury, specifically Mercury retrograde. It's like, oh, why is this old thing coming up? Why is this thing from my past? Why can't I stop thinking about it? Well, it's because it's time for you to like go over everything and consider what you missed. Mercury pinpoints the smallest of details that others cannot see, that others cannot pick up on, and it really fleshes it out and gets intimate with it. This is why I feel Geminis especially can be absolute psychopaths, because they are very keen observers. You can really nitpick and can really get down in there and like know exactly where to stick that knife and like jiggle it around to elicit the result that the desired result. Now, I hope that that doesn't sound like I'm saying it as a good thing, because it's not. That is not by any means an emotionally, spiritually mature way to behave. And that is using powers of insight and intellect negatively. What we do want to amplify about Mercury placements is that they're very understanding. Now, I don't mean to say this is like they're compassionate. No, that's not what I mean, because like, let's look at the chart actually. There you go. Let's look at the chart. We have Mercury here. This is back when it went retrograde on the 30th. Here in the final degrees of Aquarius, which is an air sign. Air is the sign of communication, once again, of intellect, of ideas, of intelligence. Yeah. Logic is what I want to really get clear here. It's about logic, because it's important to understand that there are two forms of communication, and these forms of communication include bodily and verbally expressions. Like, some expressions we cannot control, such as on a very, very biological, very, very subversive level. You can't control. If you're afraid and you're like, oh, I'm so stoic, I'm like, you know, whatever, maybe your hands are shaking and you can't control that. Maybe like, you know how like they're like about wolves, like, or dogs, they can smell your fear. Your biochemicals are emitting that smell. those your body's emitting those biochemicals and like your hormones, your pheromones, all that stuff. That carries information that is perceived by the senses that are able to receive and process them. And that information is processed in the brain. Now, that's very different from if I'm telling you, like, I'm not afraid of anything, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you can say whatever you want to say and you can believe whatever you want to believe. But ultimately, people lie, but energy doesn't. And I think that's the most important thing that we're learning about here with this Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. We have been indoctrinated into systems where we want to believe what others have to say because it's just easier than getting into a conflict about the fact that people lie a lot to protect themselves, mainly. For whatever reason, like all of these actions are predicated on either having fear or faith in what is coming to us. And, you know, it's really up to us whatever we choose to base our actions off of. If we choose to base our actions off of fear, then the way that we communicate with the universe is if we choose to put out actions based off fear, we're going to generate more instances in which we will behave that way. It creates a cycle. Once a cycle picks up momentum, it's really hard to get out of. So it's best to just try not to get into it to begin with. The thing of it is, we're already so far gone in those directions. And, you know, that's something that like we know because ultimately, I want to move this so that like, yeah. So ultimately we know that, right? We know that we have all of these cycles that have built up and like we have shadow work that we have to do and we have to break past these like cycles that we've gotten wrapped up in, and they may not even be cycles that we started because a lot of them happen with us being indoctrinated at very young ages. The ages of 1 to 7 years old are from being born to 7 years old, and I would even say in utero to 7 years old. That's the time of being indoctrinated. And if you can embed ideas into a person that young, those are things that they can generally carry forth forever unto whatever state, like unto death, really. And it's subconscious. They don't even have to try to perpetuate those behaviors, those ideologies, you know. So that is one way that well, and so then we have things that like are rooted in our DNA. And these are both things that are these are both ways that genetic curses or karmic debt from our family can play out in our lives. And it's like, I don't believe in curses, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's make it as simple and Western hegemony as we possibly can. Fact or fiction, biology like is handed down from our ancestors. Our DNA is handed down from our ancestors, and we inherit whatever they have picked up. And it may lay dormant within us, but it may be active in other people in our family. Therefore, we can still pass it on, and it may be active in our children's children. That's the thing about generational curses. It's scientifically, they exist. Now the thing, and let's talk about sociologically. As I said, the first 7 years of life, is spent indoctrinating us so that we practice certain things and we behave in certain ways without having to think about it. Why do you think we say the Pledge of Allegiance when we're in school, in primary school, if you live in America? Why do you think that you have to learn to read before you're like even the age of like 5? Or maybe, I think maybe like most Americans start learning to read at the age of 5. I don't know. I knew how to read when I was 4. My sister knew how to read when she was 3. So children are meant to learn to read before they turn 7 years old. We learn the basics of addition and subtraction before we're 7 years old. Um, we're potty trained, well, hopefully, before we're 7 years old. We learn to socialize and interact with others before we're 7 years old. Where I grew up, 7 years old means that you are in 2nd grade. For me, I was in 2nd grade and then in 3rd grade when I was 7. By then, I already know how to interact with other American children. And because I'm Liberian American, by then I already know how to interact with my own culture, at least within this microcosm of America, of Liberians living in America. That's when you learn things. And so whatever's handed down to you socially, let's talk just on the family level, because the family is the first institution of indoctrination. On the family level, we, in my family, my elders used to say, do as I say, not as I do. Monkey see, monkey do, okay? That doesn't work. So if you see your parents behaving badly, poorly, and they tell you not to do it, it doesn't matter what they tell you to do, you're probably going to do that thing. And you may be like, why? Like, why do I want to carry that out? Well, one, it's programmed into your DNA. And 2, whatever psychological associations with that behavior that you have been indoctrinated into, you learn to do it from them. That's how generational curses are passed down. Those are 2 different ways. And so I do want us to think about that as like the emotional communication that is subversive, that has much more to do with, as I said, the element of water communicating, the emotional communicating, versus air, which is more ideological, which is more practices and praxis, systems, structures, verbally being taught to do something. We don't just know, we're not born knowing how to read, you know what I mean? But we're taught it, and that's the air aspect of it. Whereas like things that are like specific to our community within our family, maybe thinking certain things are funny, maybe, just like even like addiction, that sort of thing, that's all more like on the water side. Or more than anything, I think like our emotional reactions to things. If you're being told, and this is something that I learned in a parenting workshop, if you're being told not to hit people, but you're being hit, you're going to at some eventual point that's seeded into your shadow. And so as this is a practice of shadow work, it doesn't matter if you are always hitting people or if you move forward in your life and you start, something triggers you, and that there's this shift that breaks, there's this schism of selves, and suddenly this shadow comes out and you start like hitting people. Maybe you would never hit anyone while you're sober, but you start drinking, and you get really violent when you're drunk, or like doing drugs, or like whatever, you know what I mean? Or you are assaulted as an adult, and it triggers that trauma and you start acting out. These are all things that are really important, and it has to do with this Mercury retrograde, because we are shifting cycles. We are departing from old timelines, old ways of being, and we are transcending that low vibrational programming and ascending into new heights, where we don't want to practice that same stuff that kept us down, regardless of if it's our family that practiced it, if it's our community at school, you never left your hometown, you still are friends with the same people from kindergarten and you're 37 years old. Like, no, those people, that group. Maybe it's your like political allegiances, maybe it's your religious affiliation, you know, whatever community culture that you have been indoctrinated into right now, especially because we have this massive stellium going on in Aquarius with Mercury at the time of Mercury going retrograde. Mercury, the Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, and Fortuna, all, that's a major stellium with 5 placements, all in Aquarius in the 8th house, except Fortuna is actually on the very last legs of the 7th house, which I feel like is us being like, look, I'm gonna get what I want, because this is what's important to me. This is what I deserve. This is my birthright. I'm gonna fulfill my dreams. I'm gonna do what I want and I'm gonna get what I want, which is my happiness, was I'm the only one who's living this life and feeling these feelings. So we've been inherently indoctrinated into violence. We've been inherently indoctrinated into exploitative behavior and exploitation. Let's talk about, and I'm just going to throw it down here and we're going to move past it real quick. The 5 pillars of colonization. Everybody has been in contact with colonization and is indoctrinated into colonizer culture, because that's how colonization works. If you're viewing this, these are things that you need to consider about yourself. Colonizer culture, ow, I just like scratched myself really hard. Colonizer culture includes cis heteropatriarchy, also known as misogyny, is wrapped up in that. Aspiritualism, racism and white supremacy, industrialism and capitalism. Those 5 things we must investigate within ourselves and divest from those systems because they are unsustainable. They are like oppositional to life itself. They diametrically oppose life itself, so therefore they cannot last. And anything built on these structures cannot and will not last. And we are seeing that right now. That's something that we've been seeing since the beginning of 2020, because if you go back to what was going on back in the beginning of 2020, the US was about to go to war with Iran, which would have meant war with Russia. This virus was just really touching down in Wuhan. I remember January for like December 31st of 2019, like January 1st of 2020, I remember hearing this news about this on the BBC, because I was in London at the time. And there were the Australian bushfires, which were catastrophic. You could see the smoke from space. You know, there was a locust infestation in Northern Africa that was creating, which was destroying the crops. You know, and prior to that, I believe back in 2018, you had the Amazon rainforest fires, rapid industrialization, rapid spreading of absolutism and fascism across the world. It wasn't just in the United States. It was in, and in France, they had a transit strike going on. That had to do with their pensions and their terrible economy. Brexit was going on. You know, it wasn't just, oh, like COVID happened and all of these things started happening. Maybe for Americans, it may have felt like that, but for the entirety of the world, this was a long time coming. There was a lot of terror. There was a lot of strife. There was a lot of struggle going on. You can look at what's happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro. We can look at what's happening in the Philippines with Duterte. Like, we can look at what's happening in my country with our leader, President Weah. Like, this is Collectively, it was a mess. The foundation was so brittle because it did not allow for the flow of life, which is water. And we can get deeper into that. And since this is the pet Patreon, I will get a little bit deeper into that because, you know, y'all are subscribed. So not for nothing, it's important to consider that the water wars have already begun in certain places. Flint, Michigan doesn't have clean drinking water still, and it's 2021. A lot of places all over the world don't have clean drinking water. Sages and shamans and spiritualists and monks all over the world have been going to the world's rivers and bodies of fresh water, praying to the water because of the pollution of the water, the pollution of the oceans. We're not even supposed to really be eating fish from that area between like Alaska and Japan because of the Fukushima nuclear waste that contaminated that water. Now, these are all things that may not be impacting us directly up in our face right now, but they're all things that we need to be considering because in a few years, the effects of those things are really going to become like impossible to ignore. And if you have any connection to your body, it's already impossible to ignore. However, these systems of colonization have taken us away from being able to interact with our body, have taken us away from being in touch with ourselves, in touch with our souls, in touch with our spirits that are enshrined in our bodies, but ultimately our bodies live in the spirit because the spirit supersedes everything else. The final frontier is the physical. So all of that being said, Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, all this energy in Aquarius, that which has been exposed to us over the past year, it wasn't just out of nowhere. And we haven't even come up on a year since COVID. So it wasn't just out of nowhere. As I've been saying, we have been experiencing a collective Saturn return, with Saturn being in Capricorn for 3 years. So this goes back to 2017 when Saturn entered Capricorn. Okay. That's when we really started to feel these shifts happening collectively. 2017, not for nothing, is a year after the 45th president of the United States took office. So we can already see the social devolution happening. Other things that we can see, you know, we have to remember that there was a lot of energy happening in Capricorn itself, and we're gonna look at that right there. Now, I want to see if I can do like if the blackboard thing, like annotate. Ooh, yes, oh my god, so exciting. Okay, I'm like gonna try to do it. But so we have to remember that prior to let's see, can I do it? Yay! Oh my god, this is so exciting. We have to remember that prior to Saturn and Jupiter transiting into Aquarius, these planets were in Capricorn. Here they are in Aquarius now, and they were in Capricorn. They were in Capricorn with Pluto. So that's all of those like karmic placements were in Capricorn, really having this like reckoning, a social reckoning essentially of the culture that we embody, and that we perpetuate, and the systems that we practice on a deep karmic level, on a spiritual level. This is like an account being balanced, essentially. And I think about this a lot, and I've said this in these videos before, how Selina Kyle in The Dark Knight Rises says essentially, I'm gonna just look it up exactly what she said, because no, I like to say the exact. Okay, yes. She says, there's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne, Batman. You and your friends better batten down the hatches, because when it hits, you're all gonna wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us. And if you're one of those conspiracy theorists who believes that like these things are like they precede those things in media, those things precede like what happens in real life, and that's something that you want to be aware of. But it's also something that's just like, you know, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to see what's going on. You just have to actually pay attention and have a shred of sense, and an inkling of an ability to think critically. And even then, you don't have to have those things, because it's all happening right in front of us. So that's where we're at. And a lot of stuff has been revealed. And so with this Mercury retrograde, we have Mercury here in Aquarius. We have, as I said, we have a major stellium with the sun, Jupiter, Saturn, and Fortuna in Aquarius. And take Fortuna out of it. Fortuna is in the 7th house. This is really about us getting balanced with our inner and outer life. And the more that we choose to go against the grain in the ways that we know we need to, because it's for the better of humankind, it's for the better of civilization, it's for the better of the collective, and not just humankind, because that's the kind of thinking that got us into this mess, the better of life on Earth in general. Because we are a cancer. We are parasitic. We are destroying a world that is so completely unlike our own. That is the ocean, which makes up 70% of the planet. And yet we think that we can go out into space. It's absurd. So we're killing the bees. Rapid and rampant deforestation, talking once again about the Amazon rainforest, about Brazil, about this authoritarian fascist wannabe dictator, Bolsonaro, who literally declared war on the indigenous peoples of Brazil, who protect that forest, which has a climate of its own. It is that big of a deal, what is going on, this energy that we're interacting with. And that is why we must understand that no, maybe no single one of us can stop all of this on our own, but we can do our little part by going against the grain of what we've been indoctrinated into, going against the grain of what we've been programmed to do, stepping into our power by accepting that it is our responsibility to divest from these systems and invest into new ways of being that protect, uplift, enrich, and nourish life on Earth. It's not just about stopping, it's about replacing those systems with something else. And that, for each and every single one of us in our individual ways, has been presented to us. I would say that if you don't know exactly where you were, like what you're thinking about in terms of what you've been learning, go back through your book of shadows, go back through your journal. If you don't care, like if you don't have a book of shadows, I really suggest that you create one. And in the program, in the content that I will be making as of March, for starting with Aries season, we are going to be talking about, like, it's going to be a lot about Book of Shadows. It's going to be books of shadows. It's going to be a lot about how to create one for yourself. And I think that's actually something that we're going to do for the Club Cosmos that we're doing for spring equinox, which is going to be a 3-day virtual retreat. So yeah, I tell people this a lot because it's true. Never in a million years did I think that I would be doing this. I moved to New York City to create art and to establish myself as a creative professional. I threw parties as a means of breaking into the art industry and, you know, networking and making a mark. And I was a club kid for that reason, like really just wanted to share my creativity in that way. Never, ever, ever in a million years did I think that I would have the business that I have, that clarity would be a thing, that I would be doing, like practicing. I never even thought that I'd be able to openly share with people that I practice magic and that I do this and that I have these gifts that I have. I thought for sure I'd have to hide it forever, because I, in my bloodline, have the trauma of my an ancestor of mine being murdered for our traditional practices. So I never thought that I would be doing this, but it became more and more clear to me that this is what I needed to do. And it goes against everything that my foundational community, my family, our culture, our larger social circle felt was right, at least my mother's family, because they are super, super Christian, colonizer Christian, super, super conservative, really close-minded. And so it was not something that I ever thought was going to be, that I would be sharing with the world. But it became clear to me, the more that I shared my truth, more and more people told me that I was saving their lives, and that they felt that how I had felt, and that my being able to share liberated them to not feel insane, because a lot of them thought that they were losing their minds. And they were ashamed of themselves and they hated themselves and they were struggling with anxiety and depression and all of this stuff. And simply by me sharing my truth and standing in my integrity, in my foundation of who I am and what I know I've come to do now, I'm doing my little part to change the world. And I may not be, you know, and I'm not Nelson Mandela, I'm not Mother Teresa, I'm not Malcolm X or my personal hero, Audre Lorde. I'm not Joan of Arc, I'm Vie Darling. And that counts for something. Because if I weren't supposed to exist, best believe the universe is a higher intelligence than we are capable of understanding as human beings. I wouldn't exist. And so what I want to impart with this video for Mercury retrograde is that that's the same exact case for all of you. I'm not unique in that aspect. Each and every single one of us has something very, very precious and very, very special embedded within each of us that nobody else on the planet has. Nobody else can tell your story the way that you can. Nobody else can activate your power and use it and transmit that message the way that you can.
So instead of trying to be someone else or trying to be something else that you're not, I invite you to embody a little bit of compassion for yourself, enough that you can ground down into your integrity and unapologetically, unabashedly, and courageously live out loud. Speak your truth into existence and watch how the energy around you starts to shift into a world that is much more comfortable, much more harmonious, much safer. With the full moon in Leo, a big point, a star that loomed large in the sky of this energy was the idea of safety and safe spaces. Why we are drawn to situations that may not be so safe. And how do we divest from those things? And it's important to not be angry at yourself. Ultimately, when you're indoctrinated into a social practice, it is terrifying for a social animal like us humans to think about going against the grain because it can mean death. As a queer person, I can speak to that. My queer ancestors, maybe not by blood, but by spirit, and by DNA, simply by virtue of being human, that trauma of being murdered for being queer is embedded in my DNA. It is embedded in my mind from the first time that I saw the Matthew Shepard story on MTV. It's embedded in my mind that being queer was not safe for me from a child. It was embedded in my mind that I could not speak my truth or my emotions, or I could potentially be punished. Or the idea that I may even die. That has been embedded into me. So I only can imagine what's been embedded into all of you. But what I want y'all to understand is that we are in a different time now. We're in a different age now. And we can, each of us, reclaim our power in any capacity that we can, in any given moment, for however that looks to you. Creating safe spaces for ourselves. By ultimately becoming a safe space for ourselves in and of ourselves. Holding space for ourselves in the truth of who we are. Maybe that looks like looking in the mirror and saying, despite all of these flaws that I perceive through my mental filter of colonial indoctrination that may tell me that I'm too fat or I'm too black or too brown or too hairy or too, shapely or too thin or my boobs are too big or too small, or like I should be in this body and not in that body. Love yourself regardless of that. And you may not be able to do that in the moment, but start working on it today by looking yourself in the eyes and seeing all of these things and holding your inner child that has been broken down and hurt and telling them that you love them just the way that they are. I can see in the chart all of how all of this stuff comes together. But I don't think that I really need to talk so much about that because this is like, I think that it's more important that I just transmit this message as it comes to me. It's about getting into our bodies. It's about feeling safe in our bodies. It's about feeling at home in our bodies. It's about understanding the sanctity of our bodies, of this moment, of this experience, of life itself. It's about going where it's warm and going where you are loved unconditionally, where compassion is always on offer, even if comprehension is not yet met. we're going to want to lower ourselves to certain occasions because there are going to be a lot of situations that trigger us to past trauma in this time. Maybe somebody hits us up with something that triggers our trauma. And we want to get back into that old way of being that we know better than. Maybe we want to engage with these past cycles, these lower vibrational timelines. Don't do it. Use your tools. Because guess what? It's easy enough to use the tools when it's easy enough to use the tools, but when it actually comes down to it and the chips are down, that's when we show that they are our tools and we are making the active conscious choice to live this life and to practice this practice and to really be about what we say that we're about and stop abandoning ourselves, stop disappointing ourselves by lowering ourselves to these occasions. The less we engage with these situations, the less they will come up in our matrix. And this is simple physics. If every action has an equal and opposite reaction, by choosing to not engage, we are weakening that circuit. We are weakening that loop, that cycle, and we are divesting from it. And not just divesting, but we must, once again, as I said, invest into something else. We replace the harmful action with a beneficial action. And I don't like, it's not the coping mechanisms. That doesn't mean, oh, like this person pissed me off. I'm not going to respond even though I want to, but I am going to go escape into a blunt. Or I am going to go binge eat animal crackers covered in frosting. The thing that we need to replace it with is something that is spiritually nourishing, spiritually empowering, spiritually uplifting. Every time we get a harmful, painful impulse, we need to counteract that with something that is spiritually empowering, enlightening, beneficial, healing, something that helps integrate all of the disparate parts of ourselves that are fragmented through trauma and the abuse of this system, the abuse, however it happens in the microcosms of your personal life. And so with that, I think that's pretty much, that's the message. That's all that I can really say. I do think that it's helpful if we look at the aspect tables, because I do see that there is a square going on. Yeah, there's a square between, oh goodness, okay. There's a square here between, okay. Mars, dark moon, Lilith, and Uranus, which are all in Taurus, squaring this stellium happening here in Aquarius. Not for nothing, this is Fortuna, as I said, is in the 7th house with Venus and Neptune. Venus and Neptune Neptune is a higher octave of Venus, so harmonization is happening on every level. Keep going, keep pushing forward. We are almost to the end of this harrowing cycle where we're going to be on an upswing, and we're entering into that 4th dimension of unconditional beauty and infinite light, essentially. So 7 is related to 11 for me. And then it's also that it's in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. So there's a lot of correlation going on here. But we have a friendly aspect here where I think that's a trine that's going on between the moon in the 2nd house in Virgo and these planets here in Taurus. So, whatever we establish in this time, let it be breaking away from the trauma, breaking away from the drama, because a lot of drama is associated with this celestial transit, breaking away from the mental obsessions, like the sickness, the egoism, the narcissism, and really invest in community, invest in collectivization and supporting one another. It's going to be really important. Connect with people that are who spiritually nourish you and that you love, and like tell people that you love them. Tell yourself, you know, really connect with your body and make sure that you are doing your best to, even as you experience like these agitations, these annoyances, that you counter those with a lot of love and a lot of gratitude and a lot of appreciation for people, places, and things that have gotten you to this place, including past versions of yourself. Do what you have to do to really ground into your body, and just like channel high vibrational 12th dimension love unconditionally. Not, oh, later I'm going to love myself. No, do it now, because later is never going to come until you actually start. And as we forge ahead with those things, they come into fruition for us. So 11 also obviously relates to Aquarius, with this 11th house, which the dark moon Lilith and Mars are in. So this is about how we cultivate boundaries, how we hold boundaries, stop divesting in the old stuff and start investing in these new relationships that we're certain that we want to actually like work on, because like we know in our heart, we're listening to our heart, we're listening to our intuition. And that is one big thing we gotta give up, is not listening to our intuition. So I think that that about does it. I don't think that there's anything more to be said. I do think that this reading is very important to be shared with the entirety of the clarity community. So for my beloved subscribers to the, I believe the magician tier on Patreon, I'm gonna do a reading for y'all, to get a little bit more insight into this with the cards. And yeah, I love you all truly and deeply. And I'll see you soon.